Okay, are we good on the recording?
Test 1, 2.
Sounds good. Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
How do people see monitoring and evaluation in one word?
Not again.
Challenging.
Burdensome or burden.
Burden. But I think that that's starting to change.
What could monitoring and evaluation be?
An opportunity.
Opportunity.
I like that. An opportunity for improvement.
What would you say?
See, I think for me, there might be a lot to learn, but that once you do, you can see how useful it is.
I want to make data fun.
You are listening to the Monitoring and Evaluation Technical Assistance,
or META podcast.
Improving the collection, management, analysis, and use of data
to improve outcomes for refugees in the U.S.
Brought to you from the International Rescue Committee with the support of the Office of Refugee Resettlement.
META.
Welcome to another episode of the META podcast. My name is Jamie Costigan. I am the Monitoring and Evaluation Technical Advisor for the Monitoring and Evaluation Technical Assistance Project, or META. Today, we are joined by Kasra Movahedi, a Technical Advisor for Economic Empowerment Programs at the International Rescue Committee. We will be talking today about the findings of a recent IRC study on the financial capabilities of new Americans. The study draws on data from more than 2,400 refugee households and program performance monitoring data from IRC economic empowerment programs from around a dozen U.S. cities. The report on this study is titled Financial Capabilities for New Americans, Lessons Learned from Early Interventions with Refugees. It was released in May of 2017, and we'll share a link to it on the META website after the podcast. Kasra, thanks for joining us.
Great to be here.
Kasra, can you first start off by telling us a bit about why you did this study? What questions were you hoping to answer through this research and why these questions are important?
Sure thing. So the study itself actually has three main parts. The first is kind of a review of refugee financial situations in the early years. The second part is a study of outcome data connected to the programs or in financial capability that we've been implementing with new arrivals. And then the third is really looking at kind of some best practices, tactical approaches on implementing financial capability for new Americans. And so it's not purely a research study, but one that was sectioned off into these three helpful parts that in some ways could stand alone, but work really well together, targeted mostly to service providers looking to understand the situations of refugees when they first arrive and hopefully to be able to identify some things that they may be able to use or build upon to help clients to more quickly achieve upward economic mobility. Another key topic that we focused on in the paper is looking at financial coaching. This has kind of emerged as a best practice in kind of the mainstream economic empowerment world. And one of the things that we were curious about and wanted to test is to see how well it works applying this kind of coaching model to refugees and to newcomers. And so there's a lot of information about the lessons learned and the impacts of that approach.
This is so interesting, and I vouch that the report is a great resource for anyone. So I encourage everyone listening to definitely read it after this podcast. What data did you look at in order to answer these research questions, and how did you go about collecting it?
We started with kind of family budget assessments that are first completed by RMP caseworkers, and then as clients transition into employment, there's usually a secondary budget touch point that we capture. And then through our financial capability programs, we were able to continue to update these budgets over time as clients participated in various workforce programs or were working with us on building their credit or managing their finances. Specifically, the key indicators were gross income, net income, the percentage of income that is wage-based, right, as opposed to public benefits, net worth, and credit score. And then we took that set of data and applied a series of different filters. The primary cut that we did was the number of coaching sessions that a client had received. But then we also did cuts by length of time in the U.S., gender, and access to financial products. So every RNP program in the country is collecting refugee budget information. But we were fortunate enough to be able to get that into the form of data and then to expand the time frame to be able to give us some greater insights into the financial lives in the early years of new arrivals.
So that's a great transition. What are the findings of this study? What did you see about the average refugee household, particularly in this few months post-arrival?
Well, nothing that was terribly surprising. but it's really good to have some more granular information and data on this. So what we found is that the family budgets are extremely tight. It is not uncommon for someone's kind of monthly household budget to have maybe $5 of expendable income. And that's really important, right? Because while maybe you can pay for your basic expenses, one small unexpected cost, like a cell phone charger, and you're over budget. There's also little resilience. So families typically, not only do they not have savings, they actually have negative net worth. Part of that is the IOM loan, but then there's other debt that can pile on. Because of these factors, they're prone to shocks. And if you consider that clients start out without a credit history and without savings and with tight budgets, all three of those factors then create a situation where one meaningful, expensive, and unexpected expense can wreak havoc on a family's budget. From the income perspective, we also saw the early months are very much characterized by volatility. Clients are transitioning into and off of various cash aid programs, as well as starting employment. And so there's just a lot of change within those first few months. And that, again, not terribly surprising, but having the numbers helped us to, understand it a bit better.
What would you say are the implications of those findings for service providers and policymakers?
Well, I think that helping clients to quickly establish some level of financial resilience, and there's probably many different ways that one could broach this from a programmatic standpoint. And if nothing else, at least training and focusing on financial education and financial capability, honing in on the importance of credit early on is also critical. We unfortunately see so many clients who make some very simple and avoidable mistakes in their first few months or year in the country that ends up as a derogatory information on their credit report and stays there for 7 years. And so, it's heartbreaking when a simple mistake like not filing a change of address form when you move, and so you didn't get that, cable bill, ends up negatively impacting your credit score 6 years from now. And, maybe you can't get a mortgage, or if you do, you're going to pay more for it because you have a ding on your credit. So I think that the data very clearly communicated to us that early intervention is a good investment.
You mentioned that all organizations are collecting a lot of this standard data that you used for this analysis, but not all organizations have the staff or the time or the resources to be able to really engage in this rigorous analysis of their data. What would you say are a couple of things that organizations that have very few resources might do with that program data to better understand the financial capabilities of their clients and be able to use that data to improve the outcomes of their financial capability services?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I've learned in dealing with data, and especially in trying to have multiple people kind of move in unison under one set of protocols and understanding of what goes in which field, is to keep it simple. And especially in a situation where you have limited resources, really think long and hard about what are really those core things that are most meaningful to us. What is the most straightforward way that we can ask these questions, that we can explain this information such that we're consistently getting accurate data entry. The other piece, and this is really easy to overlook, is conducting regular quality assurance. So looking at your data, ensuring that the quality is where it needs to be. There needs to be some level of accountability for staff to enter their data in a timely fashion and correctly. And it just, my experience has been that 100% of the time, if there is very little quality assurance to no quality assurance, our data quality will plummet. And of course, then the worst thing that can happen is people spend time to enter a bunch of data, but it is entered in such a way that it's not usable, and nobody wants that outcome. Lastly, once you start to compile data, think about the different things that you might want to disaggregate it by that could be really useful to you as the service provider or to an external audience that may have interest. So some of the things that we really typically tend to hone in are that are interesting internally and externally are country of origin, date of arrival, education level, and gender.
Now, in the study, you examine what you refer to in the report as a suite of 3 fundamental financial capability services to address the unique situation of new Americans. Can you tell us briefly about these services and what you learned about them through the study?
Sure. The way that we segmented the 3 services within financial capability, it starts with financial education. So that's your traditional classroom-based training on budgeting, banking, credit, and taxes. It's important to give people facts, especially newcomers, and especially when there's a lot of misinformation amongst both mainstream and immigrant populations on a lot of these topics. The second pillar is financial coaching and counseling. And this is a one-on-one service, with counseling being more of a transactional service where you're really just helping clients with whatever they present with that has to do with money. So that could be walking in with a plastic bag with mail that they don't understand and helping them go through it, to writing letters to dispute incorrect information on a credit report. Eventually, what we are trying to do is move clients to the point where we can have a relationship with them that is more of a coaching type of a setup, wherein the client is articulating their goals and coming up with steps that they may be able to take to achieve those goals, and our staff become more of a guide and someone to help hold them accountable, and then provide resources as needed. The last pillar is financial products. So these are things like credit builder loans or auto loans that can be delivered internally by IRC or externally through banks or other nonprofits or CDFIs that provide financial products. But it is something that is a critical part of the program. So that's kind of how we define it. Those are the three core pillars of financial capability. And in a nutshell, what we've seen is that it is indeed effective. And there's been a lot of research done over the past few years, especially on coaching on financial capability programming. And a lot of it is pointing to the right direction in terms of client outcomes. And we feel like we have been able to do our small part to kind of add to that body of knowledge in affirming that indeed, even for new arrivals, you can relatively quickly move things towards a coaching relationship in some instances, and that integration and early intervention of this suite of services is effective.
And what would you say that these findings mean for future economic programs, whether they're implemented by the IRC or by other service providers? You mentioned, that you feel like that the study has added to the body of evidence. So how do you see people applying it?
Well, hopefully some would be able to use this information to apply to local foundations or other supporters to try and bring more capacity to their organizations to deliver financial capability programming. I think it's also important for stakeholders like ORR and PRM to be aware of these, and some of those that have kind of some decision-making power over where some discretionary funds are spent, that we're beginning to be able to bring some quantitative lens to the impacts of this sector. The other piece ultimately is it just helps to underscore the return on investment on financial capability programming, that a modest investment of time and service delivery early on for refugees can really make a lasting impact. And our data looked at clients to about the first year and a half to 2 years that they're in the country. And so, through that lens, that longer term lens, a lot of these outcomes may not present themselves immediately, but what we're seeing is that it is a very worthwhile investment. And so hopefully we see more and more refugees have access to tailored financial capability programs just as part of their, resettlement experience.
Great, thanks. And I just want to make sure that I understand correctly. This was a descriptive study of outcomes looking at ongoing program data. It wasn't a randomized control trial, right?
Correct.
So final question. What are the next steps that you think we should pursue for research? What would you say is like the top research priority related to economic programs and outcomes for new Americans?
One of the things that we would welcome and that we're trying to do our part in is just more evidence, more research on interventions and project designs that work for refugees and for our clients. There is not a lot of studies out there that look at specific interventions to help achieve economic mobility. The other thing that was really clear, and this is more zooming into our own work, is what we found in the study is that there are still very significant unmet needs for a lot of the women that we serve. We need to focus more on gender-based programming. We found that the percentage of women that access financial coaching and capability services was well below that of men. And we have some initial ideas why, but that's certainly something that we want to start to try and pilot and program for to overcome kind of some of the barriers to access the services. On the bright side, what we did see is that when women did connect with financial coaching and financial capability programming, that we saw their key indicators trending in the right direction as well, that net income, net worth, credit score, all of those things over time started to improve. So we think that we have relevant services, but the challenge seems to be reaching women and overcoming perhaps some of those barriers. Finally, there's a lot of national evidence around financial coaching. And for us in the refugee world, and starting with kind of new arrivals, we really have to start with counseling. And I think that they're two distinct approaches, but there's often a lot of overlap. And you might have these experiences where a person is getting both counseling and coaching in the same session. What we've started to do now is to do a follow-up to try and get more granular data on the nature of those client contacts that we're capturing, to understand whether it was predominantly coaching, predominantly counseling, or a 50-50 mix of both, to just try to better understand the specifics and the granular detail of coaching and counseling and the impacts that they have.
Kasra, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us today. This has been really informative. And as I said earlier, the report is really excellent. And I encourage everyone listening to take the time to look at it. That brings us to the end of this podcast. Again, thanks to you and thanks to our listeners for joining. Listeners, let us know what you think of the Meta podcast. If there are other topics you want to hear about, we want to hear about it. Email meta@rescue.org. You can also follow us on Twitter @US Meta Support. For past podcasts and other monitoring and evaluation related resources, you can visit our website, metasupport.org, and we will post this study on the website there as well. Kasra, thanks again.
Thank you very much.